hopefully it'll show as we go through. So HIV awareness training, yes, you're going to suffer me for the next hour of your lives. And for some reason now, I'm not moving on. And there we go. So the aims of our session this morning is just to improve our knowledge and raise our personal awareness of HIV, provide some information on the main ways HIV can be transmitted and prevented, to raise awareness of the impact of prejudice and stigma for people living with or affected by HIV. And unfortunately, even in the present day, that is still all too prevalent. So the more of us have factual information and an awareness, and the more of us that are willing to share that, the more we'll break that down. So I do encourage anyone on these training sessions, please share the information with others. Talk to your family, talk to your friends, talk to your colleagues and work. Don't keep this to yourself, spread the word around, because the more we can spread actual factual information, the more we can break into those irrational fears and stigmas that still seem to exist around this virus. So HIV, human immunodeficiency virus. Human, as far as we know, the two strains we have don't jump species. They stay with us. Once the virus gets into someone's body, it'll quite quickly attach itself to some of the defense fighting cells. It will mutate and it will start to multiply. And as it does that, it's gradually breaking down the immune system, so people are becoming immunodeficient. Virus, I don't think I need to say anything about on the back of the past 4 years of COVID. I think the whole world's aware of that word, but I'm sure you're all aware also. Different viruses are transmitted in different ways, and there's only certain ways of transmitting this virus, which we'll come on to as we go through the next hour. So I'm going to start you with a little quiz. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to see your answers or not, so I'm going to rely on Owen here to feed me in on this. Look, it's only 5 questions. Use the chat function. So you'll see on your screen, row little symbols. There's a speech bubble with chat written underneath it. If there's anything you're not sure of, take a guess. And the quicker we get through this, the quicker I get you to the end of what's going on. So number 1, the risk of contracting HIV would be increased by, and just type in 1, 2, or 3 for this. So 1, already being infected with another sexually transmitted infection. 2, having a poor diet. 3, having a cold. So what do you think would be? 1, already being infected with another STI. 2, having a poor diet. 3, having a cold. What do you think would increase the risk? I'm going to say I don't know if there's any answers coming through or not, so I'm going to rely on Owen for this bit.
Most are saying 1 there, George.
Most are saying 1. Excellent. Sorry, I do have to apologise for this haphazard way this morning, but I was saying to Owen, this is actually the 3rd computer I've logged onto today to actually get me access to MS Teams. So yes, for those that said it, 1, you are correct. The reasons being, HIV is a very fragile virus. Can't overstate that. It's a very fragile virus. It doesn't just need a way out of someone, it needs a way in. And the clearest route it can take is a blood route. So if someone was living with another STI where there could be lesions or sores or openings, that's what increases the risk through. But most of you seem to have gone for that anyhow. So this one, number 2, do not type in 1, 2, or 3. Give me the percentages. Where the transmission route is known, what percentage of the total number of people in Northern Ireland living with HIV do you think contracted the virus through sexual transmission? What percentage of people in Northern Ireland do you think contracted HIV through sexual transmission? Do you think it's 57%, 79%, or 98%? And I'll wait again for Owen to feed back to me with the answers. As I say, if you're not sure, take a guess.
A variety of answers coming in there, George.
Variety, a mix. I do like a mix. A mix gives me a feeling of a reason for being here. So for those of you that said it, it would be around 98% of the people in Northern Ireland would say they contracted the virus through sexual contact. Now, in every country, sexual transmission is the highest route. Here in Northern Ireland, we've historically been particularly high. There are reasons for that. I'm going to come on to them shortly. But because we're so high for sexual transmission, it's why we're so strong in encouraging everyone to talk more openly about protection and methods of prevention. So around 98% of the people in this country would say they contracted HIV through sexual contact. What percentage do you think would say that there were heterosexual contacts? So what percentage do you think would say they contracted HIV through a heterosexual transmission? You think it's 15, 37, 52?
Again, another
Another
variety.
mix coming through? Well, again, the variety's good. For those that said it then, it would be around 37% of the total number of people in Northern Ireland with HIV would say they contracted it through heterosexual transmission. Probably higher than what a lot of the general public might think, because this virus has always been very closely associated over the years with men who have sex with men and people who inject drugs. And that has led to a lot of complacency among others who don't identify with or within those groups. But we can see from the figures there's a substantial number of people who would identify heterosexual transmission. The 52 is in there for a reason. The reason being, we do check the annual surveillance reports that come out each year. The figures for 2023 should be coming out to begin the next week. They always release them on or just after World AIDS Day. But the 2022 figures, which are the most recent, would show that it was around 52% of new diagnosis in 2022 were identifying as heterosexual transmission. So for the first time, it had become the dominant transmission. And we weren't just seeing that here in Northern Ireland, that was very much across the whole of the island and most of mainland UK as well. So it was making us wonder, is the message getting out there to everyone that there's a potential risk to anyone, regardless of your gender, sexuality, or whatever? So, people living with HIV in Northern Ireland, have they any legal protections? Any laws protecting people? What do we think? Yes, no. And if you wanted to make it quicker, just type Y or N. I am quite convinced that Owen will be able to pick up what Y's and N's are.
Most saying yes there.
Most saying yes, and most correct then. Yes, there are laws. Now, there weren't historically. It actually wasn't until 2006 that the 1995 Disability Discrimination Northern Ireland Order was extended to include HIV as a specific discrimination, and it did that under Article 18 of the order. Prior to 2006, there was no specific legislation. People were turning to disability legislation, the Human Rights Act, but there was nothing there specifying HIV. Since 2006, we have had legislation in place. Now, in saying that, we are behind mainland UK with our legislation. We're still working to that 2006 amendment to Disability Discrimination Northern Ireland Order. Mainland UK is working to 2010 equality legislation, which gives much stronger protections. Now, there is work being done at the moment with the Equality Commission, National AIDS Trust, Terence Higgins Trust, etc., to bring our legislation up to par with the rest of the UK. But we do have legislation there, and where it's felt necessary, people will be supported in accessing it. So finally, you're going to be glad to hear this word, as is Owen. Finally, what year did we first hear the term AIDS? When did we first hear the term AIDS being used? Was it 1962, 1972, 1982? When did we first hear the term AIDS? What do we like for the responses, Owen?
Most saying 82 or 72.
I
No
thought I'd lost
62.
you there for a moment. I actually thought, oh no, the whole thing's went off on me again. Well, if most went for 82, then most are correct. Was 1982. Not that long ago, if you're my age. I'm sure to most, if not all of you, this is distant history. If you're my age, it's not that long ago, and I still remember it well. 1982, we first heard the term come into use. AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Not a specific illness in itself, but tremendous. It came about from doctors in the US, particularly around San Francisco and Orange counties. At their weekly morbidity and mortality meetings, they were observing groups or clusters of otherwise healthy young men who predominantly identified as gay or bisexual were presenting with certain illnesses, and the two illnesses really drawing their attention to this were pneumocystic pneumonia and Kaposi's sarcoma, which is a type of a skin cancer. So they had these groups or clusters of these otherwise healthy young men presenting with these illnesses. They thought they were coming through in sexual transmission, but they weren't totally sure. But what they very quickly established was they were coming through on a damaged immune system. So that's where the term came from. It would actually be another year before they would identify the human immunodeficiency virus. They wouldn't identify it until 1983. Right, you can all rest your little fingers again now, and I'm going to talk as quickly as I can. So, AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Now, that word in itself, even in the present day, continues to drop a lot of irrational fears and negative thoughts within people. Even in the present day, if you say the word AIDS, it can draw up negative thinking in people. So we are trying to break away from using the term, and we're now talking more about late stage or advanced stage HIV. And it really just is the break with the negative history of the word. It's not any one illness in itself. There's been a lot of misthought about this. You would have heard people saying, oh, someone's got AIDS, oh, they've died of AIDS, or whatever, as if it's an illness. It's not. It's just an overarching term that refers to any one of a number of opportunistic illnesses that could come along to someone living with HIV. Now, that's not a definitive list by any means. It's just some examples of the other opportunistic illnesses that could come along to someone with a compromised immune system. When we're talking about HIV and AIDS, what we'll have to remember is HIV in itself has not killed anyone. For anyone that contracts HIV, if they're not on treatment, it would weaken their immune system to such a degree where one of these other opportunistic illnesses could come along. And all too often in the past, that is what was fatal for people. But that was in the past. And I'm going to move on to that shortly now. So, 1982, we first heard the term. In those early years, this was very serious. They had no effective treatments. They were still struggling to find out what they were dealing with. And unfortunately, illness and death were very much features of the virus. By 1987, over 40,000 people had died in the US alone. Now, the US took a very knee-jerk reaction to this, and in 1987, they actually banned anyone immigrating into the US that was living with HIV, and that ban wasn't actually lifted until 2010. That was horrendous that it was there in the first place, but even more so that it was allowed to remain there for such a length of time. 1987 as well was the time when a lot of countries started doing advertising campaigns to raise awareness. The images in that slide are from the UK campaign, and the UK campaign, like many others, was very doom and very death orientated. There was a lot of fear attached to the campaign. The UK one, big heads, it actually became informally known as the Tombstone campaign because that's what it was, big headstones with AIDS getting chipped on them, falling down, lilies on graves, big bits breaking off icebergs. So there's a lot of fear attached to the campaigns. Now, as I say, at the time, it probably was something more to be feared because the effective treatments weren't there. But I do think the way the advertising campaigns were mishandled really ramped those fears up and increased them and actually caused a lot more concern. Also, at that time, every household got a leaflet through their door from the government: AIDS, don't die of ignorance. And for the time, the information was accurate. But I'm sure you all know leaflets come through doors and they go from the door straight to the bin without anyone looking at them. The reality is, most people were getting their information from the press and media. And unfortunately, the press and media very badly mishandled this. They reported a lot of myth and rumour as fact, and they really ramped up those fears and increased them. They also focused all of their attention on men who have sex with men and people who inject drugs. That again led to a lot of complacency among others who didn't identify within those groups. When the reality is, we know the risk is there to anyone. So it really was badly mishandled at that time. And it is from that time, I believe, the stigmas, the discriminations that we still contend with, even in the present day, stem from. However, on a more positive note, 1987 was the year the first antiretroviral drug got approval for use. It was a drug called AZT. It had been developed for cancer treatment, but they actually found it worked well at suppressing the virus down in a lot of people and keeping them alive. Now, AZT was not an easy drug regime to adhere to. There's a lot of very common side effects attached to the drug, a lot of nausea, diarrhea, night sweats, insomnia. So anyone who was on AZT, it could have a major impact on their lifestyle. But at the time, there was nothing else, and it did keep large numbers of people alive until better drug treatments came along. 1990, EastEnders, the first soap to run a storyline on a character contracting HIV, and they did it with one of the characters, Mark. They did it with him contracting HIV from his girlfriend, trying to raise awareness of the potential for heterosexual transmission because the press and media were still firmly focused on men who have sex with men, people who inject drugs. So they were really trying to raise that greater awareness. It hit the headlines again in 91 with the death of Freddie Mercury. Freddie was a world known figure that went round the world very quickly. But Freddie, like so many others, did keep this to himself. It was only the day before he died that he made a press release, and he did that because he knew what the press would do to him in the media. And if any of you remember the time, they didn't disappoint. From the first news bulletin, from the first headlines, they all focused on Freddie's lifestyle, Freddie's choices, almost like a finger pointing at Freddie's fault, when it's no one's fault to contract any illness. But 1991 was also the year the red ribbon first became the international symbol for HIV. So as I'm sure as you're all aware, because you're on this session today, World AIDS Day is the 1st of December every year, and you'll see people wear the red ribbon in support of those living with or affected by HIV, and I'm sure all of you will be wearing one this year also. Hit the headlines again in 93 when the movie Philadelphia was released. This was the first mainstream Hollywood movie to take an AIDS storyline, and because the movie went global, again it brought HIV up onto the global stage and global thought. But 1996 was the big breakthrough year because this was the year the first combination drug therapies got approval for use. It was referred to as HART, highly active antiretroviral therapy. So it was blends of different antiretroviral drugs that really did work well at suppressing the virus down and keeping people alive. Sometimes it was more informally referred to as triple drug therapy because it tended to be blends of three different antiretroviral drugs. Now, again, when HART first came on the scene, a difficult medication regime, people were on around 20 tablets per day just to get the blends of the medication right. There was a lot of very common side effects, very similar to what there was with AZT. There's also a lot of concern about possible organ damage through the long-term use of so much medication. But that was when it came out at first. Much different landscape now, because here now in the present in Northern Ireland, the overwhelming majority of people living with HIV who are on antiretroviral therapy are on a one or two tablet a day regime. Most people are actually on a one tablet a day regime. The drug companies have worked extensively at blending these into single dose medications, and they've also cleaned them up a lot. So there's far fewer side effects attached to the current treatment. And I'm sure you can all imagine taking one tablet a day with minimal or no side effects is a world of difference to juggling 20 tablets a day with possible major side effects. And it really is the changes in the medication that has changed HIV from what was once all too often a fatal illness into what we now regard as a manageable condition that people live with. And that is one thing I do want you to take away from this morning, that when we talk about HIV now, we talk about life and living with HIV. We no longer see death as a major feature associated with this virus in this part of the world. So it really is about life and living with and how we support people to do that well. I'll get back to where I should be now. So everything died away in the press and media for a lot of years, and it really didn't come up to the global attention again until about 2013. The movie The Dallas Buyers Club was released. I don't know if any of you have watched it or not. The movie was based on real people. and events in Texas. Their inability to access the drug treatments they needed, so they were going across the border to Mexico to buy unlicensed drugs, bring them back, and sell them on. It was a well-made movie because it didn't just look at a lack of access to treatment. It put a very strong focus on other areas closely associated with this virus over the years, stereotyping and homophobia. And it did tackle those as well. The central character, Ron Woodruff, he's a rodeo rider and he contracts HIV through a heterosexual transmission. And at the beginning of the movie, it is obvious they don't put any punches. He is homophobic. But it's as he loses his old friends and contacts and finds himself having to rely on people he wouldn't have in the past. It's like an opening up of his eyes as well that people are people no matter what. So it was well made. Does the rounds on Netflix at times, so I would always say it's worth a watch. Come up on the international stage again when Bohemian Rhapsody was released. The story of Queen, but it very much centered around Freddie. However, you do have to take some of it with a little bit of a pinch of salt. As I say, Freddie kept this very closed up to the day before he died. But again, it brought HIV back up onto the world stage and got people thinking. In 2021, we had the Channel 4 drama series, It's a Sin. Now, it was a drama, but it was a very well made drama. And it looks back to those early years. Sorry, if you bear with me a second. Apologies, I've had the most horrendous cough hanging on me for about 6 months now. So I'm trying not to deafen you with it. It is a drama, but was very well made and looks back to those early years. And yeah, when I watched it, it actually took my mind back to a place and time, because it does show how badly it was mishandled. The lack of information, that people weren't aware of what was happening, but how badly it was mishandled, not just by the press and media, but also by the state at that time. So I always say to people, if you do want an idea of what it was like in those early years, it is worth a watch. It's on the Channel 4 iPlayer, and again, I think it's doing the rounds on Netflix. And then last year, we had EastEnders came back on board doing another storyline with one of their characters, Zach, contracting HIV, but doing it very well and putting out those much more positive messages that there's no need for any fears, that if someone's on treatment, they're not presenting a risk to others, but doing it in such a way to show those irrational fears still exist within communities. And when the likes of EastEnders comes on board and does something like this and does it well, it's fantastic because they can reach so many people that the rest of us can't. But we haven't just seen it in movies and television over the years, we've seen it in real life as well. And these are just a few prominent personalities who have spoken out about living with the virus. Charlie Sheen, Gareth Thomas, Jonathan Van Ness, Oliver Sim. They've all spoken out about living with HIV, but none of them spoke out initially. And when all of them did speak, they all spoke of their fears of how others would react to them, of their fears of the discriminations, of being othered, of being isolated, of being judged. And unfortunately, those fears are not solely the remit of people in the public eye, because a lot of people living with HIV would have those similar fears. Every 5 years or so, there is information collected, changes its name. Sometimes it calls itself the Stigma Index, sometimes the Stigma Survey, whichever. It's a questionnaire. It's done online, it's done anonymously, and it's done worldwide. So anyone anywhere in the world living with HIV can click on to the questionnaire and they can complete it. And it is to give an idea of where we're at with the likes of stigmas and discriminations. The 2019 survey was the most recent one that was done. However, it wasn't completed prior to COVID coming along. A number of countries weren't able to complete, so it wasn't published. But Alistair Hudson, who was the CEO of HIV Scotland, did the UK part of the survey, and he did share some of the findings with me for the purposes of training. So these were responses from people living in Northern Ireland at that time. We don't know who they were, nor do we want to, but we do know there were people from Northern Ireland. So of those who completed the survey, 43% were still saying they were feeling pressure from a family member. Don't talk, keep it a secret. And I think that's a very strong indication of where we're still at with those fears around this virus. Don't talk, don't tell. And over half the respondents still, even in 2019, still reporting negative feelings like shame and self-blame. Feelings you don't get so strongly associated with other illnesses. So although we have come a distance over the years, I think the likes of these surveys show us we do still have a distance to go with this. But as I say, by spreading that factual information and breaking down those irrational fears, we can all play our part in getting there. So HIV, the human immunodeficiency virus, it is a lifelong condition. We do have to say that at present. There's always research being conducted, but there's no cure and there's no immediate sign of one. So we do have to say it is a lifelong condition. As I said earlier at the beginning, when the virus gets into someone's body, it will attach itself to some of the defense fighting cells. It will attack the immune system and it will slowly destroy it. Now, there's no set time scale for this. This is very individual. If you had someone who was young, fit, healthy lifestyle, looked after themselves, no other illnesses, it could be years before their immune system could be destroyed to a degree where another opportunistic infection could come along. Someone a bit older, more sedentary lifestyle, maybe a few other comorbidities, it could be less time. It is very much individual. I've worked with people myself when I was still within the system who, when they were tested on the back of another opportunistic illness having come along, and we did our bloods and timelines with them, I do remember sitting with people who were saying, yes, I think I remember now when I contracted it. That was 10 years ago, or that was 8 years ago. They've been living with it for years without knowing because there may not be any obvious signs or symptoms. And in fact, for around half the people, there aren't. And where there are symptoms, the ones we would hear of most often would be flu-like symptoms. Again, when doctors are doing their blood tests and we're doing our timelines, we'll have someone say, oh yeah, I had a real flu, a real bad flu last year, 18 months ago or whatever, knocked me off my feet for a few weeks. But again, when we do the blood counts and that, you can kind of gauge that was the time the virus was getting in at first. That's when it was seroconverting, and that's when the person's immune system was taking that initial hit. But our immune systems are resilient. So the person's immune system had been able to suppress those symptoms. They thought they'd had a flu, hadn't realized they'd contracted HIV. And while there may be no obvious signs or symptoms, the virus is still there and it's still doing its work and doing its damage. Now, there is no cure, but as I say, the drug treatments have come along massively over the years. And what we now know is that anyone who is on their antiretroviral treatment and adhering to it can now expect a more or less normal lifespan. This is no longer the death sentence it was. People are living with HIV and they're living long. But as we live, other illnesses do happen, other life events do come along. Because we have an aging population of people living with HIV. You'll hear people at different times, especially around this time of the year, making comments like, the numbers of people living with HIV in Northern Ireland or UK or whatever are increasing. It's almost like a fear factor. They're increasing numbers. The reasons they're increasing is people aren't dying. Well, there's two reasons. One is people are continuing to contract the virus, but also people are no longer dying from it the way they did in the past. If you go back to the 80s, even through to the 90s, um, for far too many people that contracted HIV, within 5 years, they would have progressed on to one of those advanced or late stage illnesses, the old AIDS defined illnesses. And again, for far too many people, within 2 years, they would have passed away. We're not seeing that now. People are living and they're living long with HIV. And that's one of the reasons why we have an increasing population. Simply because death is not a major feature of the virus anymore in this part of the world. Now, there can be signs of damage, as I say, for some people, but really the only accurate way of checking them is through the blood tests. And the two main blood tests that would still be done for that would be the viral load and the CD4 count. That's a very busy slide. Feel free to read it. I'm just going to talk at you. The viral load is what it says. That's the amount of virus in your body. So the longer you're living with HIV and not on treatment, the more it's multiplying. So the higher the viral load's going up, it's increasing all the time and rising. Your CD4 count, that's your T cells, your white blood cells, that's your defense, part of your defense system. So while someone's not on treatment and they're fighting and being destroyed and weakening, they're getting lower and lower. And that's what leaves people susceptible to those other opportunistic infections that can come along. So for anyone not in treatment, over time, as the viral load's going up, the CD4 count's coming down, and that's what leads to the illnesses coming along. So the whole goal of taking the treatment is to reverse that process. People take their antiretroviral drugs, they go into their body, and they set up barriers and disruptors, and they very quickly suppress the virus down. So they suppress it down, they set up barriers and disruptors to stop it replicating. Now, they can't get it out of the body completely, but they can get it down to what we call undetectable in a very short space of time. Even for someone with a relatively high viral load, they could get down to undetectable within around 6 weeks of treatment. And while they stay on their treatment, they keep it undetectable. So while the medication's doing that, the immune system is no longer having to fight, it's no longer being destroyed, and it can actually start to gradually build itself up again so that people's bodies can get more ready to fight those other opportunistic illnesses that come along. One of the big messages from this morning, and it is one I'm sure maybe some of you at least are aware of already, but it is one I hope you will get out there and share with others. Because what we now have the evidence to support us in saying is anyone who is maintaining that undetectable viral load for 6 months or more cannot transmit this virus on through unprotected sex. There is not enough of it in their body, they cannot transmit it on. We're not saying maybe they can or possibly they can. What we're saying is anyone maintaining that undetectable viral load cannot transmit this virus on through unprotected sex. And indeed, any form of onward transmission would be less than negligible. But that is the message we need to get out there more, the U equals U message. I do these trainings with staff at least 3 times a week for the health trusts across Northern Ireland, and I'm still amazed at how many people have never heard of U equals U. So it is something we need to get out there and we need to talk about more and ask others, do you know what U equals U means? If they don't, you can educate them. If they do, you can congratulate them. And it isn't just us saying this, as I say, with substantial research backing it. UNAIDS has backed many research projects on this, meta-research projects as well. BEVA, which is the British HIV Association, whose guidelines all of us within HIV treatment and care work to, they added this to their standards of care 6 years ago, back in 2018. So please do share the U equals U message. Do talk about it. I said earlier, we look at the annual surveillance reports that come in each year from the Public Health Agency. What those reports have been showing us in recent years is that of all the people in Northern Ireland who know they're living with HIV and accessing treatment, between 97 and 98% of them are regularly virally suppressed. Between 97 and 98% of those people are not in a position to transmit this virus on the others. Yes, they are living with HIV themselves, and that will be the case until such time as a cure is found, but they do not present a risk of transmitting the virus on. And that's why we need to get that message out there more, to break these irrational fears and stigmas that still exist around HIV. So I'm hoping you will all share it and talk about it, particularly coming up the World AIDS Day now at the moment. So HIV, how is it transmitted? As I said earlier, it's a very fragile virus. It needs a way out of someone and it needs a way in. But more than that, it needs a living host to travel from one person to another. It doesn't travel on its own. It's not airborne. It doesn't sit on surfaces. It needs a living host to travel in. Now, there are fluids in our bodies that can act as a living host where someone has a detectable viral load. So remember again the U equals U message, but where someone has a detectable viral load, semen, pre-ejaculatory fluids, vaginal fluids and secretions, blood, breast milk, anal mucus, they can all act as transmission hosts for the virus. Now, it can be present in other bodily fluids. It can be present in the likes of urine, saliva, even feces. It does not like them. They are not good hosts for it. The only time there would be any potential risk from the likes of saliva, urine, or whatever is if there was blood in it. But it's actually the blood that's in it that's acting as the host. It's not the other fluid around it. But where someone has a detectable viral load, these bodily fluids can act as transmission hosts for the virus. So there are only three possible transmission routes for this. Three and only three. Unprotected sex with a partner living with a detectable viral load, blood containing HIV getting into someone else's bloodstream, or from a mother living with a detectable viral load to her baby. These are the only three possible transmission routes for the virus. I'm going to take a little look at each of them now for a couple of minutes, and I am looking at my watch, believe me. Won't stop me talking, but at least I'm looking at it. So the first, unprotected sex, we know that's historically been the dominant route of transmission in Northern Ireland. We know that anal sex carries a risk of onward transmission. It's a very vascular area of the body. There's a lot of blood vessels around. The anal membrane would be more fragile than the vaginal sheath, so there is that higher risk of tearing and abrading and giving a blood route through. We also know vaginal intercourse to present as a transmission route because of the numbers of heterosexual transmissions we see coming through, and also because of the bodily fluids which can act as transmission hosts. Oral sex, I have it up there with question marks at it because it is theoretically possible for a transmission through unprotected oral sex. I've looked extensively and I cannot find a definitive one that I'm happy with. So I did go back to the guidelines, and the guidelines were saying there's a 1 in 2,500 chance. So while there's any chance there at all, I think we do have to include it and keep it in the mix. So unprotected sex, dominant route of transmission. How do we cut down on the onward transmissions? Well, one of the ways we can do that is through the proper use of protection. If you can see the images in that slide, the center one there is just some examples of the male condom. You can see it comes in a range of different colors, flavors, sizes, textures, whatever. There's something to suit everyone. They're very easily accessible. Any pharmacy, any supermarket, even vending machines. And for people that can't afford them, all of our genital urinary medicine clinics, GU medicine clinics, outreach clinics, and some of the volunteer organisations also give them out free. So there's no reason not to use them, and they are still the safest barrier protection. The image to the left then, it's a larger, heavier latex sheath. This is the internal condom. Used to be referred to as the femidom, but I think that was actually the company that made them. They are internal condom. Um, Not as easy to access as the male condoms. Pharmacies here did used to stock them, but they stopped because people weren't buying them. They can still be ordered online or in certain circumstances obtained through GU medicine, but say not as easily accessible as the male condom. And then the image to the right might be a little difficult to see. It's a little latex sheet called a dam. It was developed from the dental dam that dentists use when they're putting over your mouth and they're drilling to stop blood spatter. Someone had the idea of making them bright colours, different flavours, and marketing them as a barrier protection for anyone performing oral sex on the vagina or the anus. But we do encourage protection with all sexual practices because HIV does not stand on its own. There are a range of sexually transmitted infections. The presence of any one of them could have a very serious impact on someone's health. And again, what we also see coming through in recent years is big increases in some of these sexually transmitted infections. Syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, genital herpes are all on the increase. And not just again here in Northern Ireland, and even not just in Europe, we're seeing global increases in these different STIs in different parts of the world. So it does make us wonder, has protection kind of dropped off the radar a little? Now, you know, you can never pin anything on just one specific, but we do think possibly protection is one of the specifics that's there. So, again, please do talk about protection and the proper use of it, not just for stopping someone contracting HIV, but also for cutting down on the spread of all of these sexually transmitted infections. So protection is one way we have of cutting down on onward transmissions. We also have prevention. And the biggest weapon we've had in recent years for this is PrEP. Again, I don't know if any of you have heard of PrEP or not. I would like to hope some have. PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis. PrEP is not for people living with HIV. It's for people who may be at a risk of contracting the virus, either through their own behaviours or the behaviours of others towards them. PrEP then, in essence, it is one of the antiretroviral drugs that people living with HIV would take. In this country, we use a drug called Truvada, or a generic form of it. So if someone's assessed for PrEP and prescribed it, they take it, it goes into their body and it does the same thing as it does for people living with HIV. It sets up those barriers and disruptors so that if there is an onward transmission, there's a much greater likelihood it will not be able to attach and the person's body will be able to flush it. There's two different ways of taking PrEP. There's daily PrEP and event-based PrEP. Daily PrEP is what it says, taking one of these tablets every day. Event-based PrEP is there for people where there may be risks on occasion, but it's not a regular feature of their life. So possibly someone who engages in unprotected sex with either multiple or overlapping partners occasionally, but it's not a regular feature, and they don't want to be taking medication at times they don't need it. So they can choose the event-based route. And the way you take it is, if you know the risks are going to be there, you take two of these Truvada between 24 and 2 hours before the risks occur. You take one for each day that they're there, and then one 24 hours after and one 48 hours after. Now, I do have to say, at present, event-based PrEP is not recommended for females engaging in frontal vaginal intercourse. There's different ways of measuring the efficacy, and they think it hasn't been as effective with females. Now, again, there's dispute about that, and the researchers themselves are arguing around it, saying they've been measuring it wrong. But at present, it is not recommended, so it would be the daily PrEP route. It is very heavily researched. I mean, there's been major studies done on this. I still hark back to two of the earlier ones back in 2015, 2016. The PROUD study in the UK looked at daily PrEP. The Ippergate study done by the French looked at event-based PrEP. Both of those studies returned an 86% reduction in onward transmissions, 86% less, and both studies returned the same figure. But some of the subsequent studies that have been done, again, meta studies, are showing up to 99% reduction in onward transmissions. So we know this really does work as a way of cutting down onward transmissions of the virus. We've had access to PrEP on prescription in Northern Ireland since 2018. It originally came in on a 2-year trial, but we managed to keep it running beyond the trial period. And last year it was embedded permanently through the commissioners. So it is there. It was originally only assessed and prescribed through the GU Medicine Clinic in the Royal Group of Hospitals, but Alton Galvin in the West came on board quickly after that. And now at the present, all the 5 trust areas are running PrEP clinics. So it should be equally accessible to anyone anywhere in Northern Ireland. So if there's anyone you're aware of that would benefit from PrEP, please encourage them to phone any of the GU medicine clinics. The numbers are all on the Sexual Health NI website. So if you go to the Sexual Health NI website, you can see all the clinic details there. Please encourage them to make the call. A doctor will assess them, and if they meet any of the criteria, and the criteria are fairly loose, they could be prescribed PrEP. This could be a way of stopping someone contracting a virus that they're potentially going to be living with for the rest of their life, but also a way of cutting down those onward transmissions. Now, you can buy it yourself. You can go to the likes of the I Want PrEP Now website and purchase it. But even for people doing that, the website itself is recommending they are attending a GU medicine clinic every lot of months to have their blood screened to make sure everything's working as it should do. We've already got a number of people in Northern Ireland accessing PrEP, but we do have the capacity for more. So as I say, please talk about it, please tell people about it, raise awareness. There's actually a few really good short videos on YouTube made by the Terence Higgins Trust. Um, so if you actually type in Terence Higgins Trust and PrEP, it takes you to them. They're only short, I think they're only about 2 minutes each or so, but they are quite good and they were well made. And some people will watch a video quicker than listen to someone. So do talk about PrEP, raise awareness of it. PrEP then, pre-exposure prophylaxis. So this is where there may be an ongoing risk to someone, but we also have PEP, post-exposure prophylaxis. So this is where there potentially already has been a risk of an onward transmission, either through unprotected sex or through blood containing HIV getting into someone's bloodstream. So if this happens, someone can access a PEP assessment. Now, there are a few things about PEP that I do need to clarify. One is the assessment needs to be conducted and PEP needs to be prescribed within 72 hours of the risk having occurred. If you go beyond 72 hours, the likelihood is they may not prescribe it because if there has been an onward transmission, it would most likely have started the attach by that time. So there is only that 72-hour window, but I would always say immediately or as soon as possible because what the research in PEP would indicate is if PEP is assessed and prescribed within 4 hours of a risk having occurred, it's a 95% chance of being effective. Once you get to that 72 hours, it's only a 50% chance of being effective. So PEP then, if you are assessed for it and prescribed it, it's a blend of two of the antiretroviral drugs people living with HIV would take. It's a blend of Truvada and raltegravir. So it's quite a high hit dose. So to say the goal is get it into the body, get it in quickly, keep pumping it in for a month. It is a 1 month supply. And for anyone that is prescribed PEP, it will be reinforced to them that they need to adhere to the full month to make it effective. Because again, the research would indicate if you only took PEP for 3 weeks and decided, oh, that's enough, it's still only a 50% chance of being effective. So you really got to stick to the whole month. And it isn't just giving people a month's drugs and sending them away. There are risk assessments completed, there's further blood tests done, and there are supports there through our GU medicine clinics, through the staff in them. So for anyone in Northern Ireland that feels there may have been a risk of contracting the virus, either through unprotected sex or through blood containing HIV getting into their bloodstream, they can contact any of our GU medicine clinics. They can say they feel there's been that risk. Staff in the clinics are aware of that short time scale to work within, so people will be prioritised to be assessed. Now, it may be a telephone assessment, but they will be prioritised to be assessed because they want to try and catch people within that time scale. Now, we know our GU medicine clinics are not open around the clock, so in an emergency situation, all of our emergency departments have PEP packs and they have doctors there that can do the assessments. So if it is out of hours and you feel there has been potentially a real risk, it can be accessed through our emergency departments. But again, if it is during working hours, working within the health system, I would say GU medicine clinic because our emergency departments are always busy. You could end up sitting longer in an ED than you would to get through on a phone call to a GU medicine clinic if it was open. But it is there. It is accessible 24/7. So be aware of it and be aware of that short time scale to work within. The second possible way of contracting virus, and really need to speed up and run out of time, but I want to go through these bits at least. So the second possible way is through blood containing HIV getting into the bloodstream. Shared injection equipment does present as a risk for all bloodborne viruses. And again, when I'm talking about this, I always say to people, don't get solely and totally focused on HIV. It's only one of a range of bloodborne viruses. And while our new numbers of transmissions of HIV are reducing, some of the other bloodborne viruses are increasing. Hepatitis B and hepatitis C are massively on the increase in Northern Ireland. And either of them, again, could have a major impact on someone's life. So don't just get that total focus on HIV. It's only one of a range. But for anyone sharing injecting equipment, the potential is for transmitting any of those bloodborne viruses across. And if someone's living with one, more than one, if they're co-infected, say they were living with HIV and hepatitis C, the chances are they're going to pass both across. It's not like a lucky dip. Now, historically here in Northern Ireland, we have been fortunate. We've had a lower injecting drug culture than a number of other countries have had. So we haven't had those large numbers of people injecting and sharing injecting equipment. Up until 2019, only between 1 and 2% of our new diagnoses each year were coming through from sharing injecting equipment. Again, probably lower than what a lot of the general public might think it to be. Now, it did take a slight rise. 2020, it went up to 8%. 2021, it went up to 13% of our new diagnoses. Still nowhere near the dominant route, but we did see that change in dynamic. But we've got to think of the bigger picture, what was happening in the world at that time, and that was the pandemic period. So you had less access to things like needle exchange, testing, protection. You had people grouped together who hadn't been grouped together previously, because I'm sure you all remember to begin the pandemic, there was outcry to get people off the streets. So groupings together of people, there was less access to testing, treatment, needle exchange. There was also a change in injecting drug use because at that time, the heroin supply to Northern Ireland almost dried up. I don't know if you know this or not, and it's a bit of an aside, but about 90% of the heroin that comes into Europe comes from Afghanistan. The Taliban put a ban on the production of heroin. So there was a sudden dearth of heroin coming in. People who had been injecting heroin were turning to injecting cocaine. Now you may think, what's the difference? The difference is the time that that stays in the body for the hit or the high you get. If someone injected heroin 3 or 4 times a day, to get that same level of high from cocaine, you would be injecting 15 to 20 times per day. So that meant there was much greater usage of injecting equipment at a time when there was less access to clean equipment. So again, as I say, a range of factors come into play. When the 2022 figures come out, it had come back down to 8%, so it is on the down again. But on the back of those increased numbers coming through in 2020 and 2021, supports were increased. Now, for a number of years, there had been teams working with people who were injecting, drug and alcohol support team, drug outreach team, inclusion team, they'd all been there. But when we've seen those raises coming through, there was additional people put in. Most of those staff have been redeployed to begin the pandemic, but they were put into place again quite quickly. And in fact, some of our specialist doctors also went out onto the streets working with people. So within the past 2 years, there's been a much greater prescribing of both PEP and PrEP with people who are injecting and sharing injecting equipment. So it is being constantly monitored and managed as best it can be. Receiving blood or blood products in this country is essentially safe. Our blood is screened very highly for antibodies and antigens, so we don't see transmissions come through from blood or blood products. So I'm going to have to ask you to bear with me again for a second. Please forgive me. Occupation exposure then. So when you're talking about occupation exposure, you're really thinking of sharps injuries. I mean, I do this more with staff and within the trust, but I'm not sure. Some of you may be in positions where you're working with the public as well. Uh, what I would say is with HIV, I said earlier it's very fragile, and it is. It dies very quickly out of the body. Within minutes, it's dead. So even for a needle stick injury with that, it would have to be a fairly fresh one. It would have to be someone who's drawn up blood from themselves and then injecting into someone else for it to be that risk. Because HIV, it only lives, minutes at the most outside the human body. Again, I'm going to come back to some of the others. I've mentioned earlier hepatitis B. Hepatitis B can live outside the human body at room temperature for 2 to 3 days. Hepatitis C can live outside the human body at room temperature for 2 to 3 weeks. HIV dies within minutes. So again, I'm saying be aware of all the bloodborne viruses. Um, But again, if there is any risk, you follow your procedures. I'm sure you would all have your own sharps policies and procedures there. Just, you know, freshen them up in your own mind. But again, what I would say, if there ever is an injury and you have any doubt, phone a GU medicine clinic immediately. Phone one of the gum clinics for getting accurate advice. Because if they feel there has been any kind of a potential risk, they would then be looking to prescribe PEP and to get you access in that. So just be aware that it is there and advice is always there for anyone. When we're working, we use our standard precautions. Again, I do this with staff in the trusts. We don't use additional measures, and that doesn't matter whether the viral load is high, low, anywhere in between. It's as soon as you do something extra that you wouldn't normally do just because it's someone living with HIV, that's when you discriminate. So it's always about not discriminating, treating people as people. Third and final possible route of onward transmission. I know I'm running over a bit, but give me 2 minutes and I'll get finished shortly. Uh, Mother to baby. And that could be during pregnancy when the virus could cross the placenta to the fetus. But during the birth process, there's a lot of blood and amniotic fluid around, or it can be through breastfeeding because we know breast milk can act as a transmission host. Sometimes it's referred to as vertical transmission. Now, here in Northern Ireland, we've had the antenatal screening programme in place since 2003, 21 years now. So all expectant mums are asked to have an HIV test as part of their blood screen. Over the years that that programme's been running, there's been around 170 expectant mums have tested positive for living with HIV. And when that happens, the rest of that pregnancy is very closely monitored and managed. Also, for any expectant mum that would test positive through the antenatal screening, they will start on their antiretroviral drugs immediately or as soon as possible. The goal being to get them to undetectable before delivery. Now, what our teams do works, and we know it works because to date, out of all of the expectant mums that tested positive through the antenatal screening, not one has delivered a baby living with HIV, with a record second to no one else in the world. The only thing we still discourage is breastfeeding because you can't guarantee there couldn't be a reservoir of the virus could build up in the breast milk. So we do encourage formula feed. An added expense, but again, we got it through the commissioners to begin the 2019 that all mums living with HIV have access to free formula feed on prescription for the first 6 months. And we administer that through our GU medicine clinics. It's about keeping confidentiality, but it's also because those new mums will be attending those clinics for blood tests in those initial periods. So it makes it easy for them to collect it. It was great to get it in place. We were the first region in the UK to get that approved. And on the back of what we did, other regions approached us and took it forward in similar ways. So it's quite widespread across mainland UK now. The most important thing of all with this is testing. I'm going to do this little bit and I'm going to finish off, but it is the one bit I do want to encourage. Testing, because without testing, people won't know. Unfortunately, here in Northern Ireland, we have still too high a number of what we call late diagnosis. So that's people who have been already living with the virus for a period of time before accessing a test. Early testing is so important because the earlier someone's tested, the less likelihood of them progressing on to an advanced stage illness with the complications that could have. Also, less likelihood of them unknowingly transmitting the virus on to others. However, we are still informed consent in this country for a test. Parts of mainland UK have already moved over to opt-out testing, where it is part of the blood screen, particularly in their A&E departments. We are still informed consent. I think we will follow suit, but at the moment, we're not there yet. Sorry, the throat's drying up badly here, so it's telling me it's time to shut up. I'm just going to finish testing here. So testing, where can you get it? Look, there's a range of options for testing. All of our GU medicine clinics and outreach clinics will test. A number of GPs are happy to test. Other departments outside of GU medicine have been doing increased testing in recent years. And a number of people again have been picked up through these other departments. The voluntary sector do rapid tests. So the Rainbow Project, which is our main LGBTQIA plus project, and Positive Life, who are another charity that support people living with HIV, they'll do the rapid finger prick test. It is still quite highly accurate. It's about 95% accuracy. It takes about 10, 15 minutes for the result to come through, but it's 10 or 15 minutes to spend with someone, do a little bit of, you know, finding out who they are, doing a little bit of education. There's been a big growth in home test kits and private healthcare testing for people. But over the past 4 years in particular, there has really been a big increase in online testing. Online testing is currently done through SH24 here in Northern Ireland. It's sh24.org.uk. So anyone who's a resident in Northern Ireland can go to that website and they can order a test. You put in some details. They post the test out to you. You do the test and you post it back. It's a totally anonymous service. A number of people do prefer it because of the anonymity it offers. It's also a free service to everyone who's resident in Northern Ireland, and it isn't just for testing for HIV. They do tests for some of the other major sexually transmitted infections as well. So they'll do chlamydia tests and gonorrhea, syphilis, genital herpes. I think they're in the process of setting up virtual consultations for genital warts. They will also prescribe the oral contraceptive and emergency contraception. So there's a range of options there. Say it isn't anonymous and it's a free service. So again, make people aware of it as a testing option. When we're talking about testing, though, we do also have to mention there is a window period. There's a window period for all sexually transmitted infections and for bloodborne viruses as well. For HIV, the window period would be around 45 days for the full testing that we would do in service. If you're doing a rapid test, it could be 95 days. So for someone where there has been a recent risk and they test, depending on the circumstances, would be encouraging them to test again to cover that window period. Because if they test in those early stages, there might be too little of the virus to show up on a test. So they'd be getting a negative, but it could be a false negative because it could take that period of time for it to build up enough for a test to pick it up. Who should be testing? Look, anyone who's ever had unprotected sex with someone whose sexual history they don't know should be accessing a test. Um, I thought that was somebody trying to get out, but I think somebody trying to get in. They've maybe mistimed this being there. Um, Anyone who's ever had unprotected sex, anyone who feels they may ever have been a risk of blood containing HIV getting in their bloodstream should be testing. It doesn't have to be anything recent. To say I worked myself with periods, people in the past who were living with the virus for years without knowing. And we need to just get better at making testing something we do, because that is how we're going to normalise it. Treatment itself, then, as I say, most people are on that one tablet a day regime, but there have been developments and they're actually trialing a slow release injection at the moment. So people go on and getting an injection into each hip once every 2 months to do a slow release of the antiretroviral through the body, keeping it suppressed, keeping them healthy. It's not an option for everyone because it's only one blend of drugs that's had approval and it's not a blend that would suit everyone, but we do have a number of people accessing that already. Risks and benefits of treatment. Well, look, the benefit is if you're on it, it's helping keep you healthy, it's keeping your immune system strong. Some of the risks are really to do with people stopping and starting treatment, going on and off it and getting resistant to it. Possible side effects from treatment could be one of the reasons for that. For others, just problematic taking tablets every day. Other parts of their lifestyle might interact with that. And for some, there is that deeper psychological impact of taking that tablet every day as a daily reminder. So the only way you stop reminding yourself is to stop taking your treatment. But the teams within GU Medicine, the social work team I was with, we're all there doing what we can to support people to be able to adhere to their treatment, because that is what's going to keep them healthy and give them that opportunity for longer life. We know there's over 100,000 people in the UK living with HIV. Used to be around 7,000 new diagnoses a year, but it's been lowering. But since PrEP came along, it's massively lowered. The 2021 collated figures showed less than 3,000. 2022 figures were something similar. Here in Northern Ireland, we'd have had much smaller numbers of people, usually between 84 and 96 new diagnoses per year, usually set within those figures. 2019 took a big drop down to 63. And when you think we had access to PrEP from the middle of 2018, had to be in the mix. Now, 2020 and 2021, we did see slight increases come through again. There a range of reasons for that. But one of them being that during that period of time, the PrEP clinics were stood down because the staff were redeployed. The only PrEP clinic that worked the whole way through the COVID period was out in the Galvin up in the west. So a number of people who had been accessing PrEP weren't able to. There was also less access to protection prevention. Um, so again, a range of factors come into play. In 2022, we started on the down again. Only 52 new diagnoses. So we know there's around 6% of the people in Northern Ireland unaware that they're living with HIV, and that's why testing is so important, because that's where the risk of the onward transmissions are coming from. The overwhelming majority of people living with the virus can't transmit it on, but where there's people who are unaware, that's where the risk of the onward transmissions come from. I really do need to finish off now. All I'm going to say to you all is try to put yourself into the picture, because when we're talking about HIV and we're talking about breaking down stigmas and discriminations, I think we can only do this accurately when we put ourselves into someone else's shoes. So if it was you living with the virus, you know, how would you feel if other people were being negative towards you, being judgmental? What would that do to you? Who would you tell it to? Would you share it with others? Would you keep it to yourself? For a lot of people, HIV is something they still would be very closed about. They don't share openly. Some of the most closed people I would have worked with over the years would have been heterosexual men. Um, and again, it was the fears of telling others. It was the fears of negative reactions. It's the expectations of the reactions of others, fearing the judgments and the discriminations, things you don't get with other illnesses. You talk about any other illness, the focus is always on the illness. You talk about HIV, you leave yourself open to so much more. You leave yourself open to those negative reactions and judgments from others. And that is what holds people back. So it's just being aware of that and think to yourself, if this was me, how would I want people to be with me? Would I want to be able to talk to them? Would I want to be able to be open about this? Yes, of course. But again, by all of us educating, spreading the word of what this virus is, and more importantly, what it isn't, we can all help do that. We've got down to 52 new diagnoses for 2022. Well, I'm fairly sure the figures coming through for 2023 are going to be lower again. Our goal is to get to zero new transmissions. Because if we can get to zero new transmissions, at some point we can end this virus and we can consign it to history. But we can all play our part in helping break down those fears, discriminations, and misinformation. And I really do need to stop talking now, Owen. I've went well over my time, and I do apologise. I will stay here for a minute or two if someone wants to ask anything, but I think you've all suffered heartily.
Yes, George, thank you so much for taking that session. I think everyone will have taken a lot from that and definitely cut out the stigma of what people think it is and